Good morning, everyone. Beautiful Saturday morning. Let's look at chapter number 14 of Bhagavad Gita. And the title of this chapter is GunaNtraya Vibhaga Yog. Okay, Traya means three. So this material nature is the three kinds. So this is what we are going to learn. But before that, let's do this mantra recitation. ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायण स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराण मुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतमृतवर्षिणी भगवती अष्टादशाध्यायने आम्ब त्वामनुसन्धामि भगवत गीते भवद्वेषिणे नमो अस्तु ते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत्र येन तव्या भारत तैलपूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपा परपान पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाय गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दुग्धा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोक्ता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव वसुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगतगुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्रावती कृपेन वाहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तनी सो तीर ना खलु पांडवै नदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थ गंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदे रह पेपिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमं वन्दे परमानंद माधवं यं ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगा ध्यानवस्थित तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुषुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. So chapter 14, GunaTraya Vibhaga Yog. We've been learning in the last couple of chapters that God is one. It is universally same everywhere. That means it's all pervading and eternally dynamic. So then why do we see the differences out there? There's a clear difference between the kingdom of plant or the kingdom of animals or the world of human beings. So many varieties. So if spirit is one, why so many varieties? So the explanation or the answer to this question was explained in the last chapter also, actually. Last chapter in the verse number 22. Lord Krishna said the Purusha, that means the Atma, seated in matter, okay, that means the Prakriti, experience the guns born of matter. So these three guns we are going to talk about, they are of the matter, the Prakriti, not of the Atma. It's almost like the same water. If you put into 100 different bottles, different colored bottles, different shaped bottles, the same water will look different. So just remember that these properties are the gun. They are not of the Atma, not of the soul, not of the God. That's why another term we use for God, when we talk about it, we say nirgun. That means without these properties, beyond these properties. Okay? And these guns are not only of the property of a matter, but also the attitude of our mind also. This is another thing we'll learn. The psychological being in every one of us comes under the influence of these three different guns. So you can call them climatic conditions. And the name of these three guns are Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic. These are the three terms I want you to get familiar with. Sattvic means purity. Rajasic means activity. And Tamasic means inertia, inactivity, dullness. Okay, so Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic. These three, in different proportions, influence our mental and intellectual caliber, and they influence, and they provide, because of the influence, they provide the distinct flavor in each personality. Remember, these three are present always in everyone, but the proportion can be slightly different. And that's how the distinct aroma in our character, conduct, behavior, we see all the time. So we all have the Sattvika, because since we have the body, we have the mind, we have the intellect, and all this is, these gunas are related to these layers of our personality. So we all have Sattvikta also, Rajasikta also, Tamasikta also. Okay? It's almost like if you buy a beautiful fresh apple from the store, put it on your counter, looks fresh, good. You'll call it a Sattvik apple. After a few days, if you just leave it there, it becomes ripe. Maybe little softness in it comes. That's a Rajasik. Leave it there for a few more days. You won't even like to touch it. It has gotten rotten. That's Tamasic. So where did those qualities come in it? They were already present in there. The same way these qualities are in us. When we are in our mandir room, in our altar, we are doing puja, we feel pure, very, very pure, very peaceful, very content. That's a Sattvic nature. After you are done from there, you go into your family room, turn the TV on, watching the movie or watching the show, little activity, little Rajsikta. Somebody else from your family comes in there, picks up that remote and changes the channel. What happens then? That's Tamasikta. Okay, the same person. We all have these three. So which one is prominent at any given time? This is what we're going to learn. So these three guns function within each of us. Remember that. You cannot say that one person is 100% Sattvic and the other person is 100% Tamasic. We all need to learn the art of subjectively diagnosing these guns in us. This diagnostic process, we take the help of the symptoms. So in this chapter, we'll see the symptoms. They have been enumerated over here. They indicate the symptoms, they indicate the preponderance, one or the other of the guns in an individual. So very carefully, we got to look at this chapter. Because the knowledge of this chapter assures us a steady progress. So if we want to really evolve, if we want to make ourselves, take ourselves towards that higher level of spirituality, we need to do it very carefully. So this chapter is extremely important for all the sadhaks, all the seekers. So let's start with verse number 1, where Lord Krishna says, I will again declare to you that supreme knowledge, the best of all knowledges, having known which all the sages have attained supreme after this life. First of all, he says again, that means there's a repetition. Anything important, anything subtle needs to be constantly repeated again and again by the teacher until the student's rebellious intellect apprehends that knowledge sufficiently. Because our intellect sometimes doesn't want to take new knowledge. And at the end of life or after this life, what does that mean? It really means at the end of our egocentric misconception of life. It's not the end of this physical life, it is the end of this misconception that I am the body. I am what I have attained or achieved or procured. End of that. So a precise knowledge of the gunas, that's what he's going to tell us in this chapter. In the second verse, he says, they who having refuge in this knowledge, have attained to my being, are neither born at the time of creation, nor are they disturbed at the time of dissolution. Whenever Lord Krishna is using I in Bhagavad Gita, he is indicating the state of spiritual perfection. In the Vedas also, we see similar statements when we say Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Okay, so oneness of what? The soul with the super soul. And now Lord Krishna is proceeding to explain that it's a marriage between the spirit and the matter which creates all this. It's like a union between the Prakriti and the Purush. Purush means the soul and Prakriti means the nature. He says, my womb is the great Mool Prakriti. Mool Prakriti means this is like a root of all this or unmanifested Prakriti. My womb is the great Mool Prakriti. In that I place the germ, from which, O Bharat, is the birth of all beings. So Mool Prakriti is the matter. And how does it get energized? With God. So Krishna, the pure consciousness, is trying to explain the one womb from which this entire creation has arisen. This womb is also called the Hiranyagarbha, the total mind intellect, or you can call it a total causal body. So these are like a different ways we can understand what this is all about. So when the life functions as the total causal body, it becomes dynamic and expresses itself as the Hiranyagarbha, the total mind intellect. The total nature is termed here as Mahat also. That is the word sometimes used. Mahat means the great, the total mind intellect equipment. So vitalized by life, the inert Prakriti becomes dynamized, grows, and manifests itself as the spectacular universe which we see outside. So without that energy of God, it's inert. Okay? See, just like when the soul is there in the body, it's dynamic. When soul leaves, we call it a dead body. That's how it is in the entire universe. Continuing to elaborate the subtle relationship between the matter and the spirit, and explaining how the absolute is uncontaminated and always a vitalizing principle. He says, whatever forms are produced, O Arjuna, in all the wombs, whatsoever. And whatsoever means it could be the womb of a human, womb of a plant, womb of a bug, womb of an animal. Doesn't matter which womb. Womb is just the Prakriti. So whatever forms are produced, O Arjun, in all the wombs whatsoever, the great Mool Prakriti is their womb. And I, the seed-giving father. Okay, so the energy was given by God. Whether you want to call it Atma or Paramatma, so God. In the living world, infinite varieties of beings are born. And they continue to live. And they keep on being replaced at every moment by millions of new births. Because we are more familiar with the human bodies, but how many more bodies are being born? How many birds, how many ants, or how many microbes? The spirit cannot express itself without the matter. So just like electricity expresses through the bulb, or through the heater, or through the air conditioning. Without that wedding, we don't see it. The same thing with us as the Atma and the Prakriti. Now in the next verse, verse number 5, so he's taking up the main theme of this chapter and explaining the guns, how they bind the spirit. Because sometimes we think that if the spirit or the soul is God, how can it be bound by the matter? He says purity, passion, and inertia. So Satvikta, Rajsikta, and Tamsikta. These qualities, O mighty armed, born of Prakriti, bind the indestructible embodied one fast in the body. So these are like three cords. They just bind it. There is no equivalent English term for gun. Sure, we call it quality, we call it codes, we call it color, we can, or nature sometimes we say, but there is no equivalent word. So guns are the three different influences under which every human mind has to play through this endless variety of different moments of its changing environment. Remember that. So these guns are born of matter, produced by nature. The field. You remember in the last word, we learned the word field and the knower of the field. So guns, they belong to the field, not to the knower of field. These guns, they generate a feeling of attachment. And very successfully, they delude the self. And that's why the whole cycle of birth and death keeps on going. It's like a chain. The guns have no separate existence because they are the attributes inherent in the Prakriti. Remember that. These guns, like cords, bind the spirit to matter and create an infinite, painful sense of limitations and sorrows. That's why I was saying that through the symptoms we can understand these guns. In verse number 6, he is defining the sattva, the purity. He says of these, sattva, which because of its stainlessness means flawlessness, blemishlessness. Because of its stainlessness, is luminous and healthy, it binds by creating attachment to happiness and attachment to knowledge, O sinless one. Just like no disease can be defined by itself, nor can any emotion be described as such without explaining the symptoms and expressions. So that's why Lord Krishna is using the same technique to define these guns, because guns cannot be defined directly. So sattva is luminous because of its purity. So just like I told you, a fresh apple, you call it a sattvic apple. Because of purity, free from evil, it's healthy. It is relatively free from rajasic agitations or tamasic darkness. So sattva is the most divine mental attitude. But still it binds us. So it is still a cord, it binds us. Acts as a limitation on our divine nature. See, our soul, the spirit, is unlimited. It's one with God. But Satvikta also keeps us at a lower level. Even though it's better than Rajsikta and Tamsikta, but still, and how does it attach? To the happiness. That means when we think that we can get happiness from knowledge. Happiness, a person is painting or singing the bhajans. That's a sattvic happiness. Yeah. So goodness and wisdom, when we get attached to, and we are ready to sacrifice anything around in order to live constantly in that subtle joy, that is a sattvic binding. Now let's look at, compared to this, the rajasic symptoms. He says in the verse number 7, know that rajas to be of the nature of passion, the source of thirst and attachment. It binds fast, O Arjuna, the embodied one, by attachment to action. Action. So passions are the main symptoms of the working of Rajagun in the psychological field. Passion expresses itself in a million different urges, desires, emotions, or even feelings. Yet all of them can fall only under two distinct categories, desires and attachments. And that's what Lord Krishna has mentioned here, desires and attachment. What is a desire? Desire is our mental relationship towards objects which have not yet been acquired by us. That's a desire. I don't have it, I want to have it. And attachment is the mental slavishness. It's like which will bind us to the objects we have already acquired. So desire and attachment, they both are rajasic. These are almost volcanoes. They just keep on erupting inside our mind. Million different ways. When a person has come under the influence of Rajsikta, will have countless desires. Because actions are born out of passion, and passions arise from desires and attachment. So now in verse number 8, he talks about Tamsikta. He says, know that Tamas is born of ignorance, deluding all embodied beings. It binds fast by carelessness, indolence, and sleep. So under the influence of tamas, a person's intellectual capacity to discriminate between the right and wrong gets veiled. So it's like a sleep really means a person is asleep to the nobler and diviner aspiration of life. Person forgets what the ultimate purpose of life is. There's no consistency of purpose or even a brilliance of thought or a tenderness of emotions or even in the no nobility in the actions. When a person comes under the influence of tamoguna. Okay, so again, the actions of the guns in our inner world are briefly indicated in verse number 9. Satav attaches to happiness, rajas to action, while tamas, shrouding knowledge, attaches to carelessness. So this is like a summary of these three verses. So whenever we are careless, see, like one of the way we can say procrastination, that is a carelessness. That's tamsikta. I'll do it tomorrow. That's tamsikta. Rajsikta is rajas to action, he says, workaholic. That's rajsikta. And satav, I am happy doing this. Whether it's good, but not reaching to that highest potential. The goal of life is to know yourself, just being happy somewhere. So when do the guns produce the effects described above? In verse number 10, he says, Satav rises. Rises means prevails. O Arjun, having overpowered Rajas and Tamas. Now, Rajas having overpowered Satav and Tamas having overpowered Satav and Rajas. So, in other words, he's telling us that all three are there, but one will overpower. It's almost like three wrestlers are wrestling. And one of them is always overpowering the other two. These guns act at different times, each one of them becoming prominent and powerful for the time being. So just like I gave you the example of sitting in the mandir room, in your altar room, meditation room. So which wrestler is overpowering? The sattvic wrestler. Okay. So this verse number 10 clearly shows that at any given moment in our human personality, if we analyze it properly, we will find that we are under the influence of one predominating good. So the other two are not totally absent. They are still there. They are only of the secondary importance at that given time. But how are we to know which gun is predominant at any given time? Lord Krishna says in verse number 11, when through every gate means the senses of ours. Senses of the action also and senses of our knowledge also. Gyan indriya, karam indriya. So through every gate in this body, the light of intelligence shines. Then it may be known that Satav is predominant. And what is this light? Light really means when we are, from the mouth, we are speaking the truth. We are not hurting anybody. That's a sattvic. When these hands of ours, we are helping others. That is purity. When our feet are taking us towards a good place, that's a sattvic. When the ears want to hear the truthful message. That's Sattvic. Okay. So through every gate in this body, the light of intelligence shines. It may be known that Sattva is predominant. So these senses are apertures of the physical structure through which we perceive the world of objects. So window of knowledge. This body is very intelligent body. We got to use it properly. So the characteristic marks that indicate the predominance of Rajas are described in verse number 12. So Rajasik, that the middle one, remember that. Greed, activity, undertaking of action, restlessness, longing, these arise when Rajas is predominant. Again, he's telling us through symptoms. So under the influence of Rajas, the psychological being in us gets extremely persecuted by its own restlessness. And this restlessness is the one which gets expressed in its endless plans. Mind is always planning. It's like innumerable actions, agonizing desires, and even painful longings. And there's a greed and oppressive restlessness. That is Rajasik. And let me tell you, majority of the human beings in this human species, we are Rajasik most of the time. Okay? But with the studies, with the sadhana, we got to move ourselves towards Sattvika, the purity. So when tamas predominates, what exactly are the symptoms? In verse number 13, he says, darkness, inertness, carelessness, and delusion. These arise when tamas is predominant, or descendant of the Gurus. Descendant of Guru means that is for Arjuna. He belonged to the Guru clan. So dullness is that condition of the intellect where we are incapable of arriving at any decision. Dullness. The tendency to escape all responsibilities, the lack of enthusiasm to strive for and achieve anything is the state of tamsikta. So when tamas predominates, all ambitions are sapped. And a person sinks into delusion. So whatever life is obtained after death is caused by the quality and the quantity of desires and attachments. And the nature and the number of desires and attachments are determined by the gunas. So this is taught here in the next verse. Lord Krishna says, if the embodied one meets with the death when sattva is predominant, he attains to the spotless words of the knowers of the highest. So that means the journey after this particular embodiment will be towards the higher if we live predominantly in a sattvic state. And if when we are departing and the Rajasik is there, he says, meeting death in Rajas, he is born among those attached to action. Okay, that's why I said that as human beings, when we are born, we had some desires. That's why we are in this embodiment, Rajasika. And dying in tamas is born in the womb of a senseless. Okay. It's lower. So over here in the next verse, in verse number 16, a summary of what has been taught in the preceding few verses. The fruit of good action, they say, is sattvic and pure. The fruit of rajas is pain, and the fruit of tamas is ignorance. And if we carefully analyze, we will find that thought is the father of all actions. Thoughts are the seeds sown and actions are the harvest gathered. Seeds of weeds cannot produce but weeds. And bad thoughts can manifest only as bad actions. And what arises from the gunas? Verse number 17, knowledge arises from tamas, greed from rajas, carelessness, delusion, and also ignorance arise from tamas. Sure, there's a little repetition over here, but he really wants us to understand this. Based on this, we will do our sadhana. The functions of the guns while they appear on the stage of the mind intellect are explained in the next verse. Verse number 18. Those who are abiding in sattva go upwards. The rajasics dwell in the middle, and the tamasics abiding in the function of the lowest gun go downwards. So it's like a ladder of evolution. We can understand, we can conceive of these stages of development. The lowest state of development is seen in the vegetable and the animal kingdom. So Gita clearly tells us that if we are a human being, that doesn't mean we'll stay human being in our future births. It all depends upon the guns of our subtle body. The middle stage of evolution is seen in human beings, because as human beings, we have intelligence, health, brightness. And a higher state of existence is seen in the heavenly beings, in the Devatas. So it's almost like a yardstick used here to measure evolution in the quantity of joy and happiness, peace or bliss experienced by the beings. To describe the path of liberation and explain the moksha, which we can gain from a right judgment of the world outside, the Lord Krishna says, when the seer beholds no agent other than the guns and knows him who is higher than the guns, he attains to my being. This is what I was telling you, the Nirgun, who is beyond guns. That is God, that is Atma. So it's almost like he's giving us an art of disentangling ourselves from our own thought processes within. And this is the art of meditation. Because what are we doing in meditation? We are disentangling ourselves from the nature, from the Prakriti. A meditator who is capable of doing so will behold experience subjectively. The state of pure knowledge, uncontaminated by the dance of the thoughts. Otherwise, if the knowledge is constantly just fluctuating, our mind just keeps on churning, there's no purity in there. God cannot be seen. He is not an object of our perception or feeling or thought. He is the subject that perceives through us, that feels in us, that think or thinks with us. And in this verse, the term came behold. This behold means to indicate that the subjective experience shall be total. It should be so complete, so convincing. It's almost like we have seen it. In the scriptures, there are dialogues between the students and the master. Student asks this guru, do you see God? The guru says, just like you see this tree, the same way I see God. That is called beholding. Now in the next verse, the Lord proceeds to teach how one can attain this great goal. Because if goal is mentioned, and what is obstructing us to attain it, a good teacher will tell us how to attain it too. He says the embodied one, having crossed beyond these three guns, out of which the body is evolved, is freed from birth, death, decay, and pain, and attained to immortality. The 5 stages are common to all of us: birth, growth, decay, disease, and death. We know that anybody who's born will die. But all these stages, they are a packet of pain. We know birth is painful, growth is agonizing, decay is very disturbing, so is a disease. Death is terrible indeed. But all these sorrows are only the sorrows of matter, the prakriti, not of the consciousness that illumines them. Okay, they are only in the prakriti, not in the atma. Not only does the man of realization experience the absence of sorrow, but he also lives the positive joy of perfection. It is indeed a rare experience to be a God-man upon the earth. Because predominantly we are Rajasic, we are not even Sattvic. And to be a God-man, we got to be beyond Sattvic. So what then are the marks of such a liberated soul? If there is somebody, I mean, it cannot be that nobody is there. If somebody is, how can we recognize that person? Or how can we recognize that state in ourselves? Are we moving towards it or not? And how will a person like this will conduct himself in society? What exactly will be the relationship of such a master living the God experience with the world outside? Because I mentioned earlier, it's not after the death we achieve this. We can achieve this while living in this body. So how do we really recognize it, and what do we need to do? That's what Arjun is asking. In verse number 21, that's where we are. He says, what are the marks of him who has crossed over the 3 guns? There's 3 questions in there. What is his conduct? And how does he go beyond these 3 guns? So that means, how will we recognize him, or how will we recognize ourselves? And how will we behave in the society? Because we are still living over here. And how did he go there? Beautiful questions. So 3 questions in this one verse. Shri Krishna explains this or answers all these questions. First, he enumerates the characteristic marks by which he can recognize, and that is in verse number 22. He says, light, activity, and delusion when present, he hates not, nor longs for them when absent. That means he really truly understands that these are the characteristics of the nature. He knows he's just a witness. So that means equanimity is the essence of perfection, and a person who has this kind of a knowledge is ever in perfect balance. To have and not to have, both are equal to him. Because he is beyond both, he is living a life of inward peace, which is totally independent of the outer environment. And then in next verse, he says, description of the conduct of him. who has risen above these guns. He says, he who seated like an unconcerned is not moved by the guns, who knowing that the guns operate is self-centered and swerves not. Many of us can act the part of God as long as the situations around us are not too tempting. It's almost like a person may not be a tyrant as long as he has no power. He may live a simple life as long as he is poor. So many good qualities which we attribute to many people around are all a falsely painted superficial beauty, concealing behind its artificial, weak and unhealthy personality. But the real test of a perfect one is not in the jungle or in a cave, but in the busy environment. So the true nature in us will come out only when we are crushed. I'm sure you all are familiar with the sandalwood, which is called chandan. The fragrance of chandan emerges only when it's rubbed. So this person, this perfect person, is not in the least agitated, nor does he become hysterical by anything that is happening around him in life. This is what Lord Krishna is telling us. He is able to observe detachedly. And he is enjoying the play of the guns in himself and in the world around him. He doesn't run away from it. He doesn't run towards it either. Alike in pleasure and pain, who dwells in the self, to whom a clod of earth, a precious stone, and gold are alike, to whom the dear and not dear are the same, firm the same in blame and self-praise. So he is serenely self-composed, dwells in the self, because the peace is coming from the real source, far away from the sweat and agitation of base appetites, or the low impulses, or even the selfish passions. Moreover, he says, verse number 25, the same in honor and dishonor, the same to friend and enemy, abandoning all undertakings, he is said to have crossed beyond the goals. So this verse number 24 and 25, they are the answer to the second question. So these qualities are to be cultivated by every seeker who's trying to live Gita. To answer of the third question which Arjun asked, how does a person transcend the guns? He says, and he serving me with unswerving devotion and crossing beyond the guns is fit to become Brahman. Serving me. Mam chaya avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. So love for God, because that's what's called devotion. Such a practice of constant God awareness and dedicated service will remove all the agitations of the mind. That's how we tune up our inner instrument, which is mind, intellect, ego. That's how our meditation becomes deeper. And how can the sage himself be Brahm? Last verse, I am the abode of Brahm, the immortal and the immutable, of everlasting dharma and of absolute bliss. So that means to realize the self within is to realize the infinite self. So in this verse, the Lord is indicating the nature of the God consciousness state. And entering with a devotee himself becomes the Brahm. It's not only the knowledge, we have learned that before. Lord Krishna said, my devotee will have the knowledge, will understand it, but eventually will enter into me too. That means there's a oneness between the devotee and the Lord. So that's why ultimately he said, with unswerving devotion. Okay. So a lot of information in this chapter. So try to study it slowly also and connect verse to verse, and do not forget the previous chapters also. See, there is a connection between the chapters to chapter and within the chapter from verse to verse also. So try to study it on your own also. Let's stop it here. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.